Bernie,
Present.
Bob,
Present.
Tom.
Present.
And as everyone can see, Paul is with us too. So we have a pretty simple agenda today. And actually, we were tentatively, if there were not a referral from the council, we wouldn't be meeting today probably. But we have one referral, and it's for a study of the wastewater treatment plant. And there was a memo in the packet, and I think Athena is checking to see whether DPW wants to talk about this, or maybe Paul, if you want to present it. For Tom and Bernie were not at the council meeting last night, so they wouldn't have heard about it.
Paul, you're muted.
I'm muted first, right?
Yeah.
This is a presentation request. It's actually something that we had talked about during the budget season, and it didn't wind up in the budget presentation. So it's a request that came out of the need to look at our wastewater facility and infrastructure to develop a master plan or comprehensive plan to begin making improvements. As you know, we've already invested heavily in the gravity belt thickener, which is now installed. But there's other things that have to happen in that plant. We need a plan that gets us going forward. So this is a request to have an engineering firm come in and complete and to assess the plant's condition, what needs to be improved, lay out a timeline and priorities for things and sequencing for when things could be improved.
And it's for 700. I don't have it in front of me right now. For
750,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Guilford is jumping on right now. It looks like, yeah.
So Guilford, Paul just gave the thumbnail sketch of it. I don't know whether people have questions or if you have more to say. And the only question I had, and I think Paul just answered it, but this would be an overall plan, but it would also say, to the extent we could do it in chunks, this would be first, second, and third. Is that correct?
As far as executing the plan, we can divide it as we need to. The facilities plan, as we're going to do it, is a process that's laid out by DEP and goes through a whole range of items and talks about everything that needs to be discussed in the plan and how they would recommend upgrading it. And then there'll be a preliminary estimate. It's like preliminary design. There'd be a preliminary design and estimate for making each change to the plant that needs to be made. And then we can take that and then decide, do we want to do the whole enchilada, or do we want to do enchilada-ettes?
Okay. And the timeline on this, in terms of not just when you get the plan back, but when you think the first installment on bringing it up. And I'm mainly asking about when because you've got reserves in the fund, but it's also when would we see another bump on the rates that just went up? So just some sense of timing on it.
Well, I guess a better way to answer that question is, once the plan is done and then we decide what we're going to do, it would be 2 years from the start of the plan before we actually see any increase hitting the rates based on the work from the plan.
Okay. And Mandy, I'll stop asking questions. I've been waiting for hands to go up. Mandy, go ahead.
My questions are not well formed, but I have two sort of general basic areas of questions. The first is, when I read the amount, I was quite surprised that it was so high. The memo seems to help me understand why it would be so expensive, but can you describe a little bit more why this study is, $750,000, which is a lot of money for a study that it sounds like will not produce plans that can go out to bid, or does it get us to plans that can go out to bid stage, or just to what we would have to send out to bid? So can you do a little bit more describing exactly what we'd end up with and what the next step would be in terms of, is it just going out to bid, or is there more engineering that needs to be done to go out to bid and do stuff and all? And along with that, I guess the next sort of group of questions is, when we reviewed the sewer rates in the spring, we were told that the rates include the cost of doing these studies. So I guess I'd like more clarification on if this is a borrowing, which won't need to be started to be paid back until next fiscal year. Can you do better in explaining how the statements in the spring that the FY26 rates incorporate the cost of this, what, at least what I understood, this project that we're now seeking to authorize the borrowing for, and that meshes together? Thanks.
So originally, I'll start with the last first. Originally, this was supposed to be cash borrowing. So we were figuring we were going to spend some of our cash reserves to do this, and that we needed to replenish it right away. So originally, the rates were set with that in mind. But then the decision was made to borrow it, and then we never went back and actually adjusted the rates to reflect this is borrowing versus cash borrowing. So yes, when the 26 rates go into effect, this was already included in that rate adjustment. So I guess you could say there's a little overestimating on what the rates need to be now that it's a borrowing versus a cash expenditure. Does that make sense?
I guess that makes sense, but can I follow up? If the rates were expected to be able to, it sounds like within a year, replenish whatever was coming out of the savings account to pay for this study, so that by the end of FY26, the amount of the study would be replenished based on the rates. Why is it now borrowing instead of using that rate setting and what would be coming in for that in there? Was there just a change in how much we expected it to cost?
No, I don't really fully understand that. That was about the time where this got lost in the process and it got dropped from the whole budget process. So I'm not really quite sure why it was changed to a borrowing versus a cash. And then truly I may be misstating that they may have taken that out of the rate, but I don't think they did. I think it just got dropped and the rate was set and the rate stayed the same. It would kind of.
Yeah, I need to check with Melissa on that question, which I can follow up on.
Can I just build on what Mandy's, and thanks for asking this, Mandy. So if you're now borrowing rather than taking it out and replenishing it, we will be building up reserves fast because the rates are so high. Is that a correct statement? Or building up faster? So we're not taking the money out. We've got reserves that are, and borrowing is not going to take all of that money in the rates. So the rates are in fact higher than they need to be. But does that mean we might not need a rate increase a year from now? What does FY27 look like then? Just with this piece of information.
There was going to be a rate increase in 27 anyhow, because we're going to start paying off. There's another, I think it was the GBT was borrowed. So that borrowing will start coming in 27. So there is going to be some excess that perceivably be building up the reserve, and the rate increase for 27 could be lowered possibly because of that, because we're charging more this year. But there is going to be another hit, what we're paying for with the GBT, paying back the GBT borrowing.
I don't know whether anyone wants to stay on this, because Mandy had the other question of why does this study cost as much? You know, I think, Paul, it would be good to get that information just on why the go into cash, why go into borrowing, because if we could avoid going to borrowing and the rates were set with that expectation, um, then it's easier to have justified the rates that we just
Yeah.
assessed to everybody. So I think the question is, do we have to go to borrowing? Could we still do cash? Is there a good reason for doing it? And then what's it look like in FY 27?
Mhm.
Because
So-
that was, as Mandy's right, because that was one of the rationales for why the rates needed to go up as much as they did, to avoid completely, to draw down reserves but replenish them by pulling cash out and putting it back in. Yeah.
But we also increased the rates too for other operating expenses, such as
Right.
the
Yeah,
sludge
sure.
removal contract and all that. Which our sludge removal contract will be up next June, into June. So when we bid that and we start going into the budget process, we may find that sludge has gone up even more again. So
Okay.
the part, I mean, the first part of Mandy Joe's question, should I answer that now?
Okay, yes.
So there's certain ways to do these facilities plans and studies. If you know you're going to do any upgrades to the actual facility and it's going to, we might want to ask for maybe a loan from the SRF funds, safe SRF, state revolving funds for drinking water and wastewater. You need to do it in accordance with the policy and procedures that are kind of laid out by the DEP. So they want to see it looked at in a certain way. The process will look at, are we doing every piece of our process the way we should? What could we do to improve the process to better meet the limits and to better meet our permit, and then move forward from there. So that's how the state wants to see it. So there'll be a lot of analysis of our data. They'll be going in and looking at, what's our BODs, what's our COD, what's our what is our nitrogen level, what's our phosphorus levels. They're going to be looking at all these things and then analyzing based on how the system is now, the removal, and are we meeting it and consistently meeting it, and then looking at, well, what technology could we use in the future to better meet the requirements they want. Originally, we thought we were going to have to do nitrification in our permit. The permit came and they told us we did not have to do nitrification. Although it does seem like now in our new permit, based on our permit, we're going to have to do pH adjustment. So we're doing a pH study now, and that will tell us, do we need to do pH adjustment? The facility plan will then take that information, which is being done another study, and then start looking at what needs to be added to our process to do pH adjustment. Right now, we do no pH adjustment. And we're seeing a little bit of an issue with our alkalinity not being where it needs to be sometimes. So there's a lot more detailed analysis that goes into this. It's not just looking at this pump is 40 years old, needs to be replaced. We're looking at, well, this process is 40 years old. How can we improve the process to make the process better? So it's if we were just looking at replacing and upgrading what's there, yes, I'd say this $750,000 is a great deal. But looking at how to improve the process and to improve the machinery is what's really going on.
Bob?
It seems like when we're done with this study, we're going to be in for a lot of money in order to upgrade the system. And look, we have to do it. It's not a question of whether we should or not, but the question is that I have is, can we approach UMass and Amherst College and Hampshire College and try to get some funding from them to help us upgrade the system? After all, they use it I mean, they rely on it. And yeah, I know we have our rates and all, they pay rates, but it seems to me that this is a capital expenditure that, you know, comes once every 30 or 40 years. And maybe we could, you know, ask them for some assistance.
Well, we certainly ask them, but they will say, you run a business, you set the rates to recover the cost of the business. We pay the rates that you set. And so they pay for the usage. We can set the rates differently. And, you know, that's something we've talked about in terms of high volume users, in terms
Mhm.
of, you know, paying a higher percentage of it versus, but I think, you know, we will recover the costs by the users, and all the users do it on a proportional basis right now.
Right. Well, it may be time to think about um, different rates for different volume users. You know,
Okay.
we've kicked the idea around for a few years, but it may be time, you know, when this hits the fan, it's gonna be a big cost. So just a thought.
Bernie?
Yeah, I'm always reminded that wastewater treatment plants are like one big ongoing chemistry experiment. Um, and so, Guilford, does this seem to parallel the process we went through with the water system? Maybe a little bit more complicated because you have the bugs and the pH and everything else to worry about. But it seems to me we did a grand study and then implemented that in pieces.
Yes, when we looked at the water system, we actually had 5 recommendations, I believe it was, from the water study we did. The only issue is in the water study, there was not as much need to be as particular and following DEP requirements as we have to do in the wastewater side. So that's why, but it is sort of the same thing. In the water study, they recommended we upgrade well 4. We do another well upgrade. They talked about connecting with Hadley for a alternative source. And then they talked about Centennial. Those are 4 items came out of that. So yes, this is sort of the same thing. And we would approach it the same way probably when we get the final numbers, because I know one's going to want us to follow the number that actually will come out of this, I think.
Again, I would just, second what Bob had to say about rates and rate structure and take a good hard look at them. Thank you.
To talk about the rate structure, the facility plan is one of the pieces we truly need to do if we want to do a full, complete rate study of the wastewater system. We have to have that information in hand, or else you can't do a complete rate study, because that capital expense has to be folded into the rate study to give you your final answer, really. So.
So, to follow up on Bob's, who might help us with this down the road, are there any, you mentioned the DEP following their process so we could get the lower interest out of this fund, but are there any sources at the state that help municipalities when they had this one time? I actually, when we toured the plant, Guilford, that someone told us that one of the last times the federal government was doing infrastructure and doing wastewater was when that dated some of the equipment we had, that there was federal funds that helped us out last time. And so I'm not holding my breath on federal right now. But so my question is state, and if not, I mean, we have been, so I'll ask it both. Is there anything? And then we have been on record for things like the DPW building, something like the school building, setting up an authority. And what I don't know is whether wastewater treatment plants could be encompassed on something like that. You know, sort of other communities must, I think Northampton is facing a big bill for retooling also. So is there anything, should we be starting to work with our state reps to say there should be something? Those are the 2 parts. Yeah.
In water and wastewater, there is something already in place. It replaced the federal funds that built the plant when the Clean Water Act was passed and they started implementing the Clean Water Act way back when I was starting this world and before I started, I guess, there was federal funds flowing in to do all this work. And then what they did is they set up the state revolving funds, and the federal government actually puts money into the state revolving funds. So SRF, state revolving funds, is already in place, and this project, any project we do in the wastewater, we could apply for SRF funds and offset the cost. That's what we did with the Centennial Water Treatment Plant. That's under an SRF loan. We the university the universities and college the university and colleges do give us a bit of a step up on the SRF funds because that lowers our actual income, and we get some loan forgiveness out of it because of that. So we got a good deal of loan forgiveness out of the Centennial plant because there was also Biden money put into the SRF and they doubled our loan forgiveness. But there would be some loan forgiveness if using the current system, there would be loan forgiveness as well under SRF. So it is eligible for that loan, and it is eligible right now for some, because who Amherst is and because of the universities, for some loan relief.
But not the study is not, but the actual plant would be?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, the council asked if we could get our report back, and they will be doing a public hearing on this. So our member, I see your hands up, Mandy. So I was asking whether we're ready to vote on what our recommendation would be.
I'm happy to vote and I'm happy to make the motion.
Andy, is your hand up for
Andy-
that as well? You know, so whichever, I also see Andy's hand went up.
I'm not raising my hand to either make the motion. I'll leave that to Mandy. I think that the report question, there are things that we need to tell our fellow counselors and we need to tell our community about what to expect and why this is happening. And I think it's important that we do that, and we also have some sense of what it is that we will learn from the report that will help the community understanding. This is going to be a big hit over the course of time. We don't know how big because of all of the things that Guilford has just said, but it is going to affect rates. And you know, the more honest we are about that to begin with, I think it is helps get understanding from the community as well as counselors, and it helps prepare people for an understanding that we've had low rates for a long time, but we've deferred maintenance for a long time, and it's now catching up with us, and the benefit in prior years is going to lead to costs in future years. Guilford, if there's any analysis that will come out of the study that helps to predict the costs and the rates, how it might affect rates, just being able to say that we will learn that, and that's part of what we gain from having the firm do the work that they're going to be doing. It would be helpful to be able to describe that, what it is that not just you will learn as DPW superintendent, but what the community will learn about what'll be expected of them. So those are just additional thoughts I wanted to share. to share.
I think that was a question, Guilford.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you do a full rate study, you have to look at all three of your money expenses. And the three money expenses are personnel, operating, and capital. So the piece that we'll get for the rate study is the capital piece. So when we get the preliminary estimates for what needs to be done, you can take those numbers and you can plug those into the capital expenses. And then if you've kind of given a rough estimate of how you want to tackle that capital expense that you want to do, you want to break it up. Say there's five major areas in the plant that need adjustment and you want to do one every year or one every 2 years. Then you can lay it out in your capital expenses, and then that feeds back into the overall plan of how you're going to set your rate. Because then you know that roughly based on this preliminary number, what your capital expense is. And that's what we're missing when we do our capital analysis now, our rate analysis now. When we do our rate analysis now, we have a capital number, but it's not got the upgrades to the plant in it. It just mainly has small upgrades or small maintenance items at the plant, and it has maintenance on the pump stations and collection system for the plant. So this is the biggest piece that'll come into that rate study, and probably be the biggest driver for the rate study. With that, and as well as the facility plan will also tell us what they think our staffing should be at the plant once we make the changes. So that'll affect your personnel number and tell you what your personnel should be. It'll also tell you that if you're doing these capital changes and you're upgrading from 1970 technology and 1970 power usage, you might see a savings on your operating costs as well. So these things will all go in to give you a finer tuned rate analysis than what we do now. What we do now is we kind of just analyze, well, this is our staffing, this is our operating costs, this is what we project as our operating costs. Next year, it'll be a 5% or 4% increase in power. There'll be a 20% increase in sludge removal. That's how we do it now. But taking the facility plan and the information from what needs to be done capital wise, and then what you expect to be changes from the capital improvements, and then how you expect to lay it out, that will all go into your rate analysis and give you a finer number for what you think your rate analysis should be for the next, or what your rate should be for if you want to do a 10-year or a 20-year analysis over it. So it's a big piece of that rate analysis.
So in terms of Andy is leading, we put that sentence in, your last sentence in, Andy, on we haven't done major expenditures in the past. We put that in when we explained the rate increase in May. So I guess any additional information, so the big parts of the plant that we're looking at are 1970, that's when we purchased, or any earlier than that?
No, the plant we have now was installed. It came online in 1979.
Okay.
If you're there visiting, the little electrical shop to the
Yeah.
right, that was the old plant.
Okay.
So it was,
No, so we can put some of this information in, and then I noticed you chose your words carefully, that newer technology might yield operating savings, and newer technology might influence staffing, and hopefully in the lesser rather than more, but I'll leave it as might, since the direction isn't, and I don't know, you had laid out some of the operating costs, but things like electricity and just supply things that you're buying. But is the current plant a heavy user of electricity?
the wastewater plant is the largest user of electricity in Amherst.
Okay.
Well, in the town of Amherst realm. I think UMass is pretty heavy in electric usage, but out of all the town facilities, the wastewater plant's the biggest user.
Bob?
Yeah, I think I heard Guilford. I think I heard you say that it's not just um, equipment that we need new equipment. It's also process that, the process we're using is 50 years old, and maybe it's time to, we need to upgrade our whole system, and that might include some process changes as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
When we were looking at this earlier, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, one of the things was people were pointing out that our headworks, where the wastewater comes into the facility, we have an older, antiquated way of handling the wastewater it comes in. There's newer technology that helps you take out the gravel, the rocks, the t-shirts, the rags, that actually gives you better life in your pumps in the plant. Um, we don't have that installed now. The aeration basins we have are mixers. It's basically a martini glass. You stick your martini glass stirrer in it and you stir it to aerate the mixture. That's an old school technology. A lot of people are switching over to fine air bubble, which is having like the bubbles in your aquarium coming up through the gravel and giving you air all over the bottom. Um, so yeah, some of our technology that we use, our chlorine system, we're doing a chlorine study now, but our chlorine system is an older, antiquated system. Um,
Yeah, I just think it's important to point this out that we're not just replacing what we have. We're really bringing it up to date, and that's going to change a lot of things, but it's gonna make it probably more reliable. I know that we hear these horror stories of things breaking down in the middle of the night, and you know, hopefully we'll have a more reliable system as well as a system that's more efficient.
Andy, and I'm taking notes. Well, we'll have Zoom too, but what we'll do, Guilford, is draft a paragraph on what's old with some of these examples, and then you can fix it if I didn't get it right, quite right, on
that's
the
fine.
and the terminology. Andy.
Yeah, again, we're still focusing more on the report right now
Yeah.
that come out of the motion that Mandy's going to eventually make on our behalf. But you had mentioned about possibility of lowering costs on power usage, and that this is the biggest power usage currently of town facilities, which makes me think back on the whole question of our net zero energy efforts. And I'm assuming that, but I don't know whether this facility, where it falls in under that particular bylaw and policy, um, and whether it does or not, whether also in thinking about solar panels or other techniques to generate electricity and reduce power costs might be something that ought to be considered too, or whether it would be considered in the thinking through the design of the work that needs to be done. So I guess that's partly a question as to whether that's feasible to reduce our future operating costs by thinking about options like solar in what's being developed.
Um, the, they, this is kind of like the discussion we had with Centennial. The site's not big enough to totally power the entire facility with solar. So if you wanted to use, I mean, the facility runs almost entirely off electricity. So there's a boiler for hot water, and there's a and heat. So heating would be one of the things that you could look at for net zero, and then and heating and cooling. but then the site's not big enough to actually have enough solar panels on it to actually run the whole site. So you'd have to net meter from another solar farm somewhere to get you to net zero. But it can be looked at.
So I know UMass didn't want to, there's some land on either side of it that's UMass land, I think, so if you needed more, since they're putting solar panels everywhere, so this might be a place where we could think of approaching UMass, I'm just saying if it made sense to think of solar panels, freestanding and then feeding back to our meter. Yeah. Mandy.
Andy's question brought up that I think the net zero bylaw exempts the systems themselves,
Process power, yeah.
the power that would be used to run the system, but not the heating, not the computer use or lighting or things like that. And so should this study look at how many would the amount of upgrades that we are doing to this facility that this study is going to tell us we need to do trigger the bylaw? And if it does the study cover plans for how we would make sure the portion that needs to be net zero under the bylaw is covered with like solar panels and all? Would the study comprise making sure the bylaw is complied with?
Actually, I think most of the issues, most of the electrical uses in there is process equipment and falls under that exemption. So you are only talking about heating and hot water, I think, is what would be discussed. There's actually a couple of technologies that have been brought to the plant, and people have talked about putting them in the plant, and we've talked about piloting at the plant for heating and for actually generating electricity. And those will probably be looked at again as being usable at this time. One of it is taking heat and taking cooling from the wastewater itself to heat and cool the plant. The water that comes into the plant is almost always about 50 degrees, 50, 60 degrees. So if it's really cold outside, you can take some of that water and preheat your air temperature, and then you have less of a demand for what you're going to raise up to the occupied space temperature. You can maybe possibly use it's basically heat pump technology to pull out the heat from the water to heat the space. And then in the summer, you turn around, you take the cooling properties of the water and you cool the space with it. There's several companies that approached us about that in the past about doing pilots. I assume we'll probably look more into doing that if we make these changes. It makes a great deal of sense. UMass was actually approached by a company to use this technology around UMass. Amherst College has been approached about it as well. It would just take they're basically heat pumps. They're used a great deal in China, and one of the companies that was doing a pilot with us or wanted to do a pilot was from China, and they kind of ran into some issues being Chinese. And that being an American company, they couldn't get the grant to do it. There's also people may not like this, but there's also a process called pyrolysis. And the process of pyrolysis takes the waste sludge and basically it's an high temperature incineration process, and it does two things. The first thing is when you're burning the sludge, so you don't have to haul it off, so it saves you in cost. The second thing is that going through the pyrolysis process, the temperature is high enough to destroy PFAS that may be in your sludge. So those are the two benefits of that process. EPA is kind of pushing for places to try it, so that will probably be something that's looked at as well. But that's That's sort of well, it's kind of in the industry, it's considered kind of a green way of addressing your sludge disposal and a green way of powering your facility. In Amherst, it may not be considered that, but that will probably be looked at as well.
So I think we have a partial net zero won't apply to the larger costs, but there are some potential process changes that involve equipment that might address energy efficiency. Yep.
Yep. The fine air, if we decide to go to fine air bubble aeration, that actually would reduce our electrical usage by at least about 50%. The big mechanical mixers we have right now are very, very heavy users of electricity and very, very big. You're just stirring a big pot of water. So it takes a lot of power to stir that pot of water.
Any other questions? And so Paul, you'll get back to us before we get back to the council on why the shift from cash to borrowing as a, so we can write it up. Are we ready to have a motion? And I'm looking for any hands up. And I think the answer is yes, and Mandy's ready to make the motion.
I'm always happy to make a motion. I move to recommend that the council adopt appropriation and borrowing authorization order FY 26-09A, an order approving and authorizing borrowing to fund capital project bond authorizations.
Second,
Who was the second?
Bob.
Bob. Okay. If there's no more discussion, I will call out names for a vote. Mandy,
Aye.
Kathy is a yes. Bernie,
Support.
Bob,
Aye.
Tom,
I support.
and Andy.
Aye.
It's unanimous with one counselor and one resident member absent. So well, now my notes got even more complicated because I have words that I don't know how to spell, but I can look them up. And so I will attempt to.
It's PYROLYSIS.
Okay. So I will do a draft, get the technology piece to have Guilford's eyes on it, and we have 2 weeks for this, so I'll try to get a draft maybe by the weekend and let Guilford look at it first, so we don't have to try to edit the tech part, and we just get what I think Andy's absolutely right, to the extent we can. The message is going to be, this is the beginning of what will be a larger investment. And we don't know it yet, but once the study is done, we'll have a better sense of how it's going to hit rates for the 3 different areas. And Andy, I don't, we used wording last time is that we haven't kept up with maintenance. I think some of this is not just deferred maintenance, but we've got a whole system that needed this kind of analysis rather than just going through, from what I'm hearing from Guilford, it wasn't like we should have done this pump and we let it go. We've got, when I hear that the flow is bringing in rags and rocks into and breaking down pumps, that's something that you want to do all the pieces together rather than some. So I think trying to capture that it's not just that we've been turning our backs away from this, but now the time has come, we actually have to do it, or else we risk failure. So I'll try to capture that, as well as the notice that the rates they just saw will be going up in the future. We just don't know to what extent. And anything else on this? So it's a 1:45 or 1:45, 10 of 3. So I wanted to just have a quick discussion to organize ourselves. And I've got a draft of some questions I think we might want to ask of the town and of the school superintendent, that are sort of timing questions, not so much data questions. And I'll put them up on the screen if that's okay with people. And this is terms of organizing ourselves for the fall. So let me see whether I can magically do this right. Document. Here it is. Is that showing up on the screen?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. I didn't mean to have all the document recovery. So on our next meeting, how do I scroll down? Okay. So what I came up with that we might want to ask coming out of this meeting, and again, it's to ask for timing. So questions of the town manager is, when are we likely to know actual FY25 and fourth quarter? So it's just is it, October, sort of a date? For the next meeting, which is September 2nd, could we see the reserve balances at the end of either July or August for free cash, stabilization fund, capital reserve fund, and reparations? And then, Paul, I added one that we became more aware of due to the investment earnings in the general fund. We've got something I've just called a cash capital account, where we've got ambulances or fire engines that we're planning to buy, but they're not going to be delivered for 3 years. So we've pushed the capital over there. We have, I think that's where we moved the 5 million out of capital reserve into here. And so getting like how much is in that account and some sense of earnings. So I don't know how easy or hard that is, but Melissa implied there is an account which had this. Then for the schools, I'm just rattling these off. It was Samira. When will the schools, regional and elementary, know final FY25, the actual spending rather than the projected? When will they know staffing for FY25? How many did they actually have, and at the start of F26, and enrollment? So these are just, some of these questions are purely, when is this going to be available? And Mandy, I see your hand up. So this was, I was trying to frame it on, I didn't expect to get this information, but just to know the timing. So I see Mandy's hand is up, and then I had some possible topics for the next meeting that I wanted to run by people.
Yeah, just for the school stuff, I believe staffing for FY25 was in their budget for the FY26 budget. Actual staffing, I think, for 25 was in there, but I could be wrong. It might only be actuals through 24. But enrollment is generally an October 1 date that is reported to the school committee sometime around October 15th or November 1, I believe.
Okay.
So I would guess that staffing for FY26 might be similar timing, at least for DESI reporting purposes.
So
But
you're suggesting,
yes.
so I think partly we were saying maybe we don't need to ask that of the schools because we can find it out someplace else.
Yeah,
so-
DESI will put it on once they've got it, and I think the school district has to report it early October, late September.
Okay.
Yeah, so the number is effective, whoever, the enrollment is whoever's in the room on October 1.
Okay.
And then they go back, it takes them a couple weeks to pull that number together, and that's what they submit to DESI, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to remove this as a question we forward because we already know it. And then similar, Paul, on staffing, would the staffing already be something that's being reported up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you could leave all 3 questions, we can pose that to them, it's fine.
Okay, and again, if it's a simple answer, I'm not looking,
Yep.
like, and it's not like we will know this for sure on October 15th or something.
Yep. Yep.
Andy.
A couple of questions, probably for Paul. One is, if we all regret losing Holly a lot, you probably more than the rest of us, but is that going to have any effect on our free cash certification?
Yes,
Will we get it in on time?
yes. Yeah, no, I mean, we'll get it done. I mean, we have contingency plans, of course. So, and we have backup people who can come in and help with that, but we have time. It won't, free cash doesn't get certified. It has to be done by usually, November, December.
Yeah, those our friends at DLS always encourage us to be on the early side as opposed to the late side of the deadline.
Habitually, the town has always been on the early side. I don't think we'll be on the early side this year.
So that's one set of concerns that I've had in trying to think through how our timing goes, because until we get free cash certified, we can't take that step that Kathy was kind of alluding to, as to things that we will be planning for. What do you do after? The other, another thing that I was curious about, financial indicators meeting, whether our staffing turnover and Sean not coming until October is going to affect the date on on when you can do the indicators meeting, which then affects the pressure that's on the council to do budget guidelines, especially in an election year. So do you have any ideas to when we might?
Yeah, so we've already begun working on the financial indicators. We'll have the bulk of the slides ready. I think our goal is to hit the council's first week of November agenda. It depends when Sean is able to start. Again, the worst case scenario is mid-October for him. Hopefully he's happy to come in earlier if he gets released from his commitment to the Holyoke Public Schools. So our mission is to get to the November. It might slide, but it's certainly before Thanksgiving. But I understand the pressure it puts on the council because that is the kickoff point. So we are going to drive as hard as we can to get to that first week of November.
Okay, thank you. And my last question along these lines, and it has to do with planning for this committee, and that is we're also the audit committee, and we still haven't done the audit that we would normally have done months ago for was 24. Do we have any ideas to when that's going to be done?
Yeah, so Holly got the last piece of information to the auditors before she left, so now it's in their hands. They thought they will take a few weeks to go through the material that she just submitted to them. So we're talking sort of mid-September. So we'll have to put that on the agenda at some point in September, most likely.
Okay.
Okay, that's it, Kathy.
No, that's fine. So some of this, my first, when this is, it sounds like, the closing out of the year. And I asked it as fourth quarter rather than certified free cash, but it sounds, so what is the due date on certified free cash? You said we're usually early, Paul, but is it?
So you need to set the tax rate they want you to set the tax rate by December 31st.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Mandy.
To follow up on Andy's questions and given Paul's answers, it sounds like we normally get sort of the closeout financial orders is how I call them. All the free cash sort of transfer ones, the closeout orders sometime in October. It sounds like that might be November or December.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, should we begin, this is the question for the committee. I know financial indicators is looking at November, but if we're dealing with in committee all of the closeout financial orders in November, as well as just having received the financial indicators, and we're trying to get everything done by December 31, should we begin discussing the financial guidelines in October or September in more general terms about, without knowing the financial indicators, should we begin discussing some of our goals for the financial guidelines prior to the financial indicators meeting so that we have that in good shape before we've got all the closeout stuff and Paul's review? I'm just thinking about what the council agenda, as Lynn said last night, about Paul's review, all the trying to get as much cleared off the agenda for not transferring to the next council as possible. Would it be better for us to push forward some of those budget guideline discussions, including maybe inviting chairs of school committees? I know it's early, chairs of the library trustees to potentially weigh in on guidelines or things they'd like to see, programs they'd like us to potentially mention in guidelines, things like that, to start those discussions.
So, I like other people's, I think, I like that idea a lot, just on a, you know, it's absent the numbers, Mandy. I mean, we know what it looks like. We know what FY 27 looks like in purely, you know, the budget book terms. But we know which issues we're going to be wrestling with. So so potentially earlier. I know there's going to be a discussion coming out of this meeting with the other 4 towns, select board finance people, of an earlier 4 towns meeting potentially called by us rather than the schools, you know, and we don't have the timing of that either. So I'm just putting this on because given what Paul is saying, you know, mid-September, we have a meeting on the 2nd of September, the 16th, October 7th, and October 21st. We likely have a pretty light agenda in those time periods if we're not getting fourth quarter certified free cash and other things. So we've got time in in those meetings to begin a discussion without saying like, what's the date we start it? Yeah. Does that seem right? I'm somehow with the way I've got my screen, I only see some of the people here, but I'm seeing people nodding their heads. Andy.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, and you've kind of alluded to it, I just want to attach the formal words to it, is whether, and thinking about a budget coordinating group meeting, and if so, where that would fit into the schedule.
You know, I guess I still think the right time for that is when the indicators are ready, not before that. I mean, that's when we've pulled together a fair amount of information, but that's a personal opinion. Bernie.
I would suggest that if you can do a budget coordinating committee early, that you do it early based on the feedback we're getting at the charter review. Most of the comments we make have nothing to do with the charter, but everything to do with the way the town operates. The earlier the better. The caution here is that the first numbers people hear, they're all Tankard on. So you've got to be very careful. I'm saying you because I'm assuming the council will replace me. You got to be careful throwing those numbers out, and you might want to do a low range or a lower expectation initially. But I think the earlier you can get the budget coordinating committee together, even though they're an advisory board, the better off we'll be in terms of getting word out, especially if things are looking pretty grim.
Okay, I'm using this as notes here, and I can then separately meet with Paul offline to try to figure out what makes sense for anything else. So we've got the auditor's report coming in too.
Kathy, I just need to log off now for another
Yeah,
meeting.
no, that's fine.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so then for September 2nd, these were some initial ideas for the second, and I'm going to just send this out to everybody because this was just me trying to, right now, we don't have anything specific for September 2nd. If Paul can get us this question on reserves that I listed up above by September 2nd on where are we as of July, we had it where we were as of March, I think, in the budget book. I just wanted to get a sense of this cash capital reserve, and my sense is the free cash we drew down on for bangs, so it's at like 2.5 million. We had an accounting for that, but I want to look at it with interest. So we might have that to look at. There was a suggestion when I talked with Paul, and it might be good to get a review of what bond rating variables are looked at closely. So that would just be a reminder of what the bond ratings depend on. We may already know this, but I would like to have us see in print, the final state allocations for FY25, FY26 for these. I saw the Chapter 90, and as some of you probably remember, Chapter 90 disappeared from the budget book and disappeared from JCPC. I just wanted to make sure we had on record. So this was my list. And then it's one other item that I have mentioned to Paul, and when UMass built the new dorms with a public-private partnership, the apartment buildings are on UMass land, but they're privately owned. They set the rates. Are they taxable? Is the building taxable? I'd also become aware that UMass has on their property, they're running hearing clinics where you can go in and have your ears tested with audiologists. You can buy hearing aids. Is that a commercial activity? Is that building taxable? Paul said we probably need a legal opinion on this, and it probably, if it's worth pursuing at all, might require us doing a legal challenge to it. So I just want to hear his response. So I just put it on the list. I know Princeton University was challenged on a few of this, and the amount Princeton paid to the town went up because they didn't want to go to court on it. I don't think we've got the same situation on Amherst College campus. They don't have sort of the private in quite the same wise. So that was just a tentative list for the second, not out of my head. So I wanted to find out which of any of these people don't like, and are there any topics they would want to put on? And this is in the context of also planning for the fall. So I just had, we can come back and review indicators, starting early on guidelines, Mandy, so I didn't put any of those on. Mandy.
I would add guidelines. I'm looking through our current guidelines for, I guess, FY26, 25, or an old set maybe, that, I think there's certain sections that we could actually focus on prior to indicators easily. We might, given the discussion we had today on water and sewer, I think we added a section on water and sewer and enterprise funds last year. We could probably certainly focus and have some preliminary discussions on, budget guidelines for that. Absent numbers, I know we don't have numbers, but what are our goals for those, right? Where should fees be set? What should they be covering? What do we want to accomplish? Things like that. Capital, we might be able to do some of that too. I know expenses, the operating expenses are tough to discuss, but maybe we should start that discussion despite not having projections on how much we might have to spend. Maybe it'll be a little easier to have a discussion when everything is theoretical in a sense, when we're not trying to plug numbers in. I did like the allocation, the reserve discussion, because that does go into budget guidelines too. I think we talked about where to put proactively, where would we allocate reserves in the fall, in our last budget guidelines, right? And so we can look at what we said, remind the manager what we said in those for this fall when it comes, and say, are we thinking about changing those priorities for, fall of 2026? Things like that I think mesh into some of these agenda topics you've already got on about where the reserves are and then what we might want to do with them. So the audit might need to be on here too, just so you don't forget, depending on when things go, but that's probably a mid-September one.
Yeah,
more
he,
than
he's,
one.
Paul seemed to say mid-September, but
Yeah.
I'll put it on here, yeah.
And I do like the idea of having a discussion about commercial enterprises that UMass runs. Given that we've already sort of got an agreement with the UMass regarding the UMass hotel revenue, and all. And so I think that might be an interesting discussion to have that could also lend itself into either financial guidelines or manager goals eventually. So I do like that one as a discussion because I think it blends into what we as a committee need to do in the next 4 months to what our main goal is, which is financial guidelines.
Andy, and as Mandy put a few on, so if people, I'm adding them because I like them. So Andy, if you want to either add or comment on what Mandy added, that'd be great.
No, I think Randy actually covered some of the territory I was going to do too, but I'm going to add to it. But what so I have two things. One is when you talk with Paul about what is labeled final state allocations, and then you list those categories. I think that what might be helpful is to go back to the original projections that were made at the beginning of the process, really going back almost to the financial indicators meeting in November of last year, and how the numbers that we received compared to what was projected as we developed the budget, so that we actually more don't just get numbers, but we get the numbers compared to something. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. The other thing I was going to just comment on, I was going to bring up the UMass Hotel thing. And Bernie, you might have been around in that process too. But my recollection is that we were putting pressure on UMass to pay that its hotel be considered a hotel that was paying taxes for as is paid by other lodging. And the university was not happy with that, but then ended up, after a lot of discussion, what Swami agreed to was what was in place, what is now in place, which is that they would provide money that was equivalent to the amount that was would have been paid for the rental of hotel rooms, except for hotel rooms that were being paid for out of UMass's own budget for guests of the university. And that was a political play that had to be worked out through several town managers and with a little bit of pressure from the select board at the time to achieve that result with the chancellor. So that was the history of how that came about, and if you're successful in wanting to try and use a similar strategy, I thought it would be just helpful to kind of revisit the history a little bit.
So Andy, you just, that I do, are you suggesting that we talk about that on the second, or just we can have a paragraph that describes it? Because that is how it's been described to me, that they look at the revenues, they subtract out when they put someone up, and they do the equivalent of what they would have paid if it was Boltwood Inn.
That was what was agreed to, yes.
Yeah. So Bernie, I
Yeah,
just don't know what, I did understand, that is the way that was agreed, that we at least got that piece of money coming in.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
that was done very grudgingly, and as we go through and we look at where we might say that UMass or Amherst College, Amherst College, for example, rents out property for computer camps and summer camps and tennis things and other stuff like that. Where we're assuming that we can just simply insist that these are businesses and we're owed something from them. It'll be a struggle, and there'll be a need to, at best, make some compromises on it. I was going to suggest that memory serves, faulty that it is in my case, that some of the universities in Boston have had dormitories built for them by private private contractors and operated. So it might be helpful to look around and see if Boston or any Cambridge or any other city like that was able to extract some revenue, property tax revenue from those buildings. If not, it might be a pivot that could be applied by other towns, other cities and towns that might build enough momentum to have the legislature do something about it. We have Amherst is an outlier in as much as we have the highest percentage of students in our population of any city or town in the state. And we tend to ignore the fact that there are other cities and towns that have student populations and state facilities, and we continually fail to form a network with them and form a lobbying group with them to push for some changes that would be beneficial to all of them. So if we go into this as just Amherst once, we're going to have a very difficult time. As Arlo Guthrie said that if one person does it, it's an accident. If two people do it, it's a coincidence. And if three people do it, it's a movement. So what you need to do is form a movement. And the town, for whatever reason, has been unwilling to do that. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you.
No, thanks, Bernie. And I'm willing to dive into this a little bit. I know Wisconsin also has some private dorms, same thing, so I look at it just one other example that it's exactly the same thing. It's a private dorm on public land that they built with private money,
But this is Massachusetts.
And so, but I think staying in Massachusetts is the right way to go.
We don't care what happens in Wisconsin or in New Jersey. We need to make it happen framed by Massachusetts law.
There's some lesser elements, at least one of the entities in town that used to cater meals and cater parties was upset when UMass started catering off campus, including providing Thanksgiving meals. At what point is UMass stepping beyond feeding the students on campus to feeding the town without pay? They may pay a sales tax on that, but it's not the same as the actual place, the way the restaurant has to pay a property tax. So I think we're starting in the discussion of this, but I think it seems like a good one if we're getting an agenda that's probably a good 2-hour agenda here, but we'll figure out what is key. So Andy, your hand is up again.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at 4 Ps in Massachusetts, it might be worth somehow reaching out to the hosts of 2 other campuses, in particular Dartmouth and Lowell, and seeing if they have any 4P program properties that are attached to those campuses, and if there's any experience from them that we can learn from.
Okay. So it's 3:17, and I think in terms of the agenda for the September 2nd, we have a full agenda. I don't know of any financial orders coming, but if we get the reserves information and starting a review of guidelines, bond ratings might or might not fit into this. Audit is more potential for the 16th. So I think it's a pretty full agenda, and I'll just go through with Paul on will we have the reserves to be looking at. So just I think everyone was here when I raised this in June. One of the interactions with guidelines is should we pull some of the money out of the capital reserve to pay for the DPW building and put it explicitly into a line that says the capital budget is enhanced by this for this building rather than just showing it up. So it's those kinds of discussions that we start to spend the capital reserve or roads. I mean, it's a capital reserve, to enhance the amount we want to spend on roads rather than just accumulating it. So I think that's the kind of discussion and how reserves interacts with the beginning discussion of guidelines without numbers, without numbers on revenues. Yeah. So I'm going to send this back to everyone in case other ideas come to you. And you can also we've done a little bit on the council, but not often. It looks like the 16th of September, the 7th of October, and the 21st, that whole group right now doesn't have major action in it. If Paul says we're not going to be getting certified cash till later, maybe we'll get it by October 28th. So I'm just looking at the finance committee schedules, but so as much as we can get the heavier lifts started, some of the other information we're going to be pressed up against the clock on. Bob.
Yeah, I think we're going to need more meetings in November and December. And I know that November gets complicated because the 4th is Election Day and the 11th is Veterans Day. But it seems like we have a lot that's going to hit from October 28th through December 16th. And we ought to think about maybe scheduling some additional meetings.
Okay.
And we've got time. We don't have to do it now, but I'm concerned that we're not going to have enough time to
Okay.
get through everything.
So at the next meeting, maybe we can look at, in November, I think that's the issue, that the Tuesdays happen to be other days and they get knocked out. So we might be needing to look at a Wednesday or another day, other than a Tuesday. So people can look at their calendars and we can double check. Thursday interacts with CRC unless we pick the Thursday that CRC is not meeting. So Mandy, we could look at CRC also, but it might be that we have to another day. I like the afternoon slot for finance, so it would be an afternoon slot.
Yeah, we might have to consider Wednesdays because I think with Thanksgiving on a Thursday, CRC's got 2 of the 3 that are left. I think.
Okay,
Although
so,
I have CRC meeting on Thanksgiving for some reason, so I think I've got the wrong date for one of the CRC meetings.
okay, so potentially Wednesday, and then we'll look specifically. Right now, as Bob said, the only day we've got is the November 18th, and that was completely because we're bumping into others. And the 28th of October, we added that. There's only a 1 week because we only had one in November, and if we could potentially get indicators, but it doesn't sound like, or certified free cash on October 28th. So Paul is just telling us it may be later than that. Okay, so this is just for everyone to think about, and we can formally do it when we meet on the 2nd, I think, when I get a little bit more information from Paul on do we need 3 meetings in October, or are we gonna get more meetings in November? Thanks, Bob, for I looked at this and go, oh, really? We're gonna have,
it's-
we're gonna write the guidelines, get them done and get them to the councils that quickly? I don't think so. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for being willing to meet today. If Athena hadn't said we had a financial order that we had to meet for, then, we potentially were gonna swap, say this meeting wasn't necessary, but I think it was a very good discussion. So if someone wants to make a motion to adjourn, I think we're ready to adjourn.
I
Andy?
move to adjourn.
Kathy seconds. Let me just make sure I see the faces. So Mandy,
Aye.
Kathy's a yes. Bernie,
Support.
Bob,
Yeah, I.
Tom,
I support.
and Andy.
Aye.
We are unanimous. Thank you all. See you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everyone.